Sarah Mitchell moved through the pediatric intensive care unit with the same quiet efficiency she had maintained for 3 years at St. Mary's General Hospital. Her soft-soled shoes made barely a whisper against the polished floors as she checked on her young patients during the late shift. The other nurses often commented on how calm Sarah seemed, how nothing ever appeared to rattle her composure, even during the most chaotic emergencies. What they didn't know was that Sarah had learned to move silently through much more dangerous terrain than hospital corridors. Before she became a registered nurse, before she dedicated her life to healing children, Sarah had spent 8 years as a Delta Force operator, one of only a handful of women to ever earn that distinction. The transition from special operations to pediatric nursing had been deliberate, a conscious choice to channel her protective instincts into something purely constructive. The irony wasn't lost on her that she now worked to preserve life after years of training to take it when necessary. But Sarah had found peace in her new calling, finding that the same attention to detail, situational awareness, and ability to function under extreme pressure that had made her an elite soldier now made her an exceptional nurse. Her patients' families often remarked on her unusual calmness during medical crises, never knowing that what they witnessed was the result of training in environments where panic could mean death. Tonight felt different, though Sarah couldn't quite put her finger on why. She had learned to trust her instincts long ago, and something in the air felt charged, like the moments before a thunderstorm. She had completed her rounds an hour early, double-checking the security of 4 lines and medication dosages, ensuring that each of her 12 young patients was stable and comfortable. The night shift supervisor, Linda, had complimented her efficiency, but Sarah's heightened awareness wasn't about being a good employee. As she walked past the nurse's station, Sarah noticed the unusual number of people in the hospital lobby visible through the glass walls. Visiting hours had ended 3 hours ago, and typically the evening crowd thinned out significantly by this time. She counted at least 15 individuals scattered throughout the main floor, most of them men, most wearing loose-fitting jackets despite the warm September weather. Her training kicked in automatically, cataloging exits, potential weapons, and defensive positions without conscious thought. The security guard at the main desk, an older man named Frank whom Sarah had chatted with countless times during her shifts, seemed oblivious to the unusual activity. Frank was a kind man, a retired police officer who took the hospital security job to stay busy after retirement. But Sarah recognized that his law enforcement experience was limited to routine patrols and traffic stops. He would be completely unprepared for what her instincts were beginning to tell her might be coming. Sarah made her way to the supply closet, ostensibly to restock her medication cart, but really to have a moment to process what she was observing. The people in the lobby weren't exhibiting normal visitor behavior. They weren't reading magazines, checking their phones, or showing the restless anxiety typical of family members waiting for news about loved ones. Instead, they were positioned strategically, maintaining sight lines to different areas of the hospital while trying to appear casual. Her Delta Force training had included extensive instruction in surveillance and counter-surveillance techniques. She recognized the patterns immediately. These weren't random visitors or even petty criminals looking for drugs or valuables. The positioning was too precise, too coordinated. This was a planned operation, and the hospital was the target. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. Hospital attacks were rare but not unheard of, typically motivated by attempts to access controlled substances, settle scores with medical staff, or create diversions for larger criminal enterprises. But the number of people involved suggested something more significant. She thought about the high-profile patient who had been admitted 2 days earlier, a federal judge who had been receiving death threats related to an upcoming organized crime trial. Judge Harrison was recovering from emergency surgery in the VIP wing, a section of the hospital reserved for celebrities, politicians, and other individuals requiring enhanced privacy and security. His presence had been kept quiet, with only essential medical staff aware of his identity and location. But information had a way of leaking, especially when significant money or criminal enterprises were involved. Sarah realized she was likely witnessing the preliminary stages of an assassination attempt, or possibly a kidnapping operation designed to influence the judge's upcoming court decisions. Either way, the lives of everyone in the hospital, particularly her young patients, were about to be placed in extreme danger by people who clearly had no regard for innocent life. Moving with practiced calm, Sarah returned to the nurse's station and began what appeared to be routine documentation in her patient's charts. In reality, she was conducting a tactical assessment of the pediatric ward's defensive capabilities and escape routes. The ward was on the third floor, with two main stairwells, one elevator, and a service corridor that connected to the adjacent maternity wing. The windows were reinforced and couldn't be opened, eliminating that option for evacuation. Her patients ranged in age from 6 months to 16 years, with varying degrees of mobility and medical dependency. 8 of them were connected to life support equipment that couldn't be easily moved, while 4 others were recovering from surgeries and would need assistance walking. Only 2, teenage brothers recovering from a car accident, were mobile enough to potentially evacuate quickly without medical intervention. Sarah had been checking the time every few minutes, noting that the lobby activity had remained constant for over an hour. Professional surveillance teams typically rotated positions to avoid detection, but these individuals seemed confident that they weren't being observed by anyone with the training to recognize their presence. Their patients suggested they were waiting for a specific time or signal to begin whatever operation they had planned. At 11:30, Sarah noticed a subtle change in the lobby dynamics. Several of the men began moving toward different areas of the hospital, while others positioned themselves near the main entrance and elevator banks. The coordinated movement confirmed her suspicions. This was the beginning of an organized assault, and she was the only person in the building with the training and experience to recognize what was happening. Sarah faced an impossible decision. Her nursing training and personal ethics demanded that she stay with her vulnerable patients, providing care and comfort during what would likely be a terrifying experience. But her military training told her that the best way to protect her patients was to take proactive action to eliminate the threat before it could reach the pediatric ward. She thought about calling the police, but she knew that by the time law enforcement could respond and assess the situation, the attack would already be underway. Local police weren't trained for the kind of sophisticated operation she was witnessing, and their arrival might actually escalate the violence, putting more innocent people at risk. The hospital's security protocols were designed for typical emergencies like fires or medical crises, not armed assaults by organized criminal groups. The lockdown procedures would trap everyone inside with the attackers, while the evacuation plans assumed that the threat was environmental rather than human. Sarah realized that she had perhaps 10 to 15 minutes before the situation escalated beyond her ability to influence the outcome. Her military experience had taught her that surprise and decisive action were crucial advantages that could only be utilized if she acted before the enemy realized they were facing organized resistance. As she watched the final positioning movements in the lobby, Sarah made her choice. She would use every skill she had learned in Delta Force to protect her patients and the innocent people throughout the hospital. The quiet night nurse was about to become something very different, drawing on training she had hoped never to need again. Moving with the same calm efficiency that had marked her nursing career, Sarah began her own preparations for battle, knowing that the next few hours would test every aspect of the training that had shaped 2 very different, but equally important phases of her life. The people planning to bring violence into her hospital had made one critical miscalculation. They had no idea what kind of guardian stood between them and their intended victims. Sarah's transformation from caring nurse to tactical operator happened in the space of heartbeats, muscle memory, and training taking over as she moved through the pediatric ward with new purpose. Her first priority was establishing communication and gathering intelligence about the threat's exact intentions and capabilities. She needed to know how many attackers she was facing, what weapons they carried, and, most importantly, whether they knew about Judge Harrison's location or if this was a broader assault. Moving to the nurse's station computer, Sarah accessed the hospital's internal security camera system using her administrative credentials. Most nurses didn't know the system existed, but Sarah had made it her business to understand every aspect of the hospital's infrastructure during her first month of employment. Old habits from her military days included always knowing her operational environment completely. The camera feeds confirmed her worst fears. She counted 23 armed individuals now positioned throughout the hospital, with more arriving in vehicles outside. They wore civilian clothing but moved with military precision, carrying concealed weapons that Sarah's trained eye could identify despite their attempts at discretion. This wasn't a desperate grab for drugs or random violence. This was a coordinated assault by professionals. Through the lobby cameras, she watched as 6 men approached the main security desk where Frank sat reading his newspaper, completely unaware of the danger surrounding him. The lead attacker, a tall man with graying temples, spoke quietly to Frank while his companions spread out behind him. Sarah couldn't hear the conversation, but she watched Frank's posture change from relaxed to confused to alarmed in the space of seconds. The conversation ended when the gray-haired man produced a silenced pistol and shot Frank twice in the chest. The elderly security guard slumped forward, and the attackers immediately began jamming the hospital's communication systems, cutting phone lines, and blocking cell towers using portable equipment they had concealed in their vehicles. Sarah felt the familiar cold focus that had kept her alive through dozens of combat operations settle over her mind. These weren't criminals motivated by desperation or greed. They were killers, willing to murder innocent people without hesitation to achieve their objectives. Frank had been eliminated simply because his position gave him potential access to emergency communications. The systematic approach confirmed that Judge Harrison was indeed the target, but Sarah realized that the attackers planned to eliminate all potential witnesses to their operation. Every patient, visitor, and staff member in the hospital was now marked for death. The pediatric ward, with its vulnerable children and dedicated staff, would be considered an acceptable loss in their larger plan. Moving quickly but silently, Sarah began her own counter-operation. Her years of Delta Force training had taught her that superior numbers could be overcome through superior tactics, intimate knowledge of the terrain, and the willingness to take calculated risks that enemies wouldn't expect. She had all 3 advantages, plus one more. The attackers had no idea they were facing trained opposition. Sarah's first objective was securing the pediatric ward against intrusion while maintaining the appearance of normal operations. She moved through the unit, ostensibly checking on patients, but actually positioning medical equipment to create obstacles and defensive positions. Heavy medicine carts were relocated to block sight lines down corridors, while portable monitoring equipment was arranged to provide early warning of approaching footsteps. The teenage brothers, Marcus and David Chun, were awake and noticed her unusual activity. Sarah made a quick decision to bring them into her confidence, knowing that their mobility and intelligence could be valuable assets if properly utilized. She approached their room and spoke quietly, her voice carrying the authority of command despite her gentle words. "I need you both to listen very carefully," she said, checking the corridor before closing their door. "There are dangerous people in the hospital who want to hurt everyone here, including the other children. I have special training that can help protect everyone, but I need you to follow my instructions exactly. Can you do that?" Marcus, the older brother at 16, sat up straighter in his hospital bed. "Are you serious? Like really serious?" "Completely serious," Sarah replied, her tone leaving no room for doubt. "I was a soldier before I became a nurse, and I know how to handle situations like this. But I need your help to protect the younger kids." David, 14, and recovering from a broken leg, looked toward the door nervously. "What do you want us to do?" Sarah quickly explained her plan. The brothers would help her move the younger, more vulnerable patients into interior rooms away from windows and corridors, while maintaining the appearance that the ward was operating normally. They would also serve as messengers, allowing Sarah to coordinate activities throughout the unit without leaving her position at the central nurses' station. As they began quietly relocating the youngest patients, Sarah used her knowledge of the hospital's infrastructure to begin preparing defensive measures. The pediatric ward's medicine storage included controlled substances that could be used as improvised chemical weapons if properly deployed. More importantly, the maintenance areas contained industrial cleaning supplies and equipment that could be repurposed for tactical applications. Sarah had learned during her military service that unconventional weapons often provided crucial advantages against better-armed opponents. Hospital maintenance areas contained everything needed to create smoke screens, slippery surfaces, and even improvised explosive devices if the situation became desperate enough to justify such extreme measures. Through the security cameras, she monitored the attackers' progress through the hospital. They had split into teams, with one group heading toward the administrative offices where patient records were stored, another moving toward the pharmacy, and a third advancing toward the VIP wing where Judge Harrison lay unconscious from his recent surgery. The team heading for the VIP wing consisted of 8 men, heavily armed, and moving with professional efficiency. They were taking their time, checking each room systematically, and eliminating any staff members they encountered. Sarah watched in horror as they killed 2 orderlies and a janitor who had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Their methodical approach meant that Sarah had perhaps 20 minutes before they completed their primary objective and began clearing the rest of the hospital, including the pediatric ward. 20 minutes to turn a children's hospital unit into a fortress capable of withstanding assault by trained killers. Sarah's military training included extensive instruction in defensive tactics and asymmetric warfare. She knew that her best chance lay not in direct confrontation, but in creating conditions that would force the attackers into situations where her advantages could overcome their superior numbers and firepower. The pediatric ward's layout, with its multiple small rooms and narrow corridors, could be turned into a tactical maze that favored a defender with intimate knowledge of the terrain. Moving with practiced efficiency, Sarah began implementing her defensive plan. Medical gases from the central supply system could be redirected to create oxygen-depleted areas that would disorient attackers while leaving defenders who knew about the hazard unaffected. The ward's fire suppression system could be manually activated to create visual obstacles and confusion. Most importantly, Sarah began preparing what her Delta Force instructors had called nasty surprises, improvised traps, and obstacles designed to slow advancing enemies and force them into vulnerable positions. 4 stands became tripwires. Medical equipment was positioned to create unstable barricades that would collapse when disturbed, and cleaning supplies were mixed to create slippery surfaces in key corridors. The Chun brothers proved to be excellent assistants, following Sarah's instructions precisely while helping to move the smaller children into the ward's most defensible interior rooms. 8-year-old Emma, recovering from appendix surgery, asked why they were playing a moving game in the middle of the night. Marcus told her they were practicing fire drills, which satisfied her curiosity without causing panic. As Sarah worked, she found herself drawing on aspects of her training that she had hoped never to need again. The cold calculation required for tactical planning, the ability to think several steps ahead of an enemy, the mental preparation for violence. All of it came flooding back despite her years of dedicated focus on healing rather than harm. Through the security monitors, she watched the VIP wing team breach Judge Harrison's room. What they found clearly wasn't what they had expected. The room was empty, with evidence of a hasty evacuation. Sarah realized that someone else in the hospital had recognized the threat and moved the judge to a more secure location, probably the basement-level surgical suites that had reinforced walls and independent life support systems. The attackers' reaction to finding their primary target missing was immediate and violent. Sarah watched them split into smaller groups and begin a room-by-room search of the entire hospital, abandoning their previous methodical approach in favor of speed and aggression. Their timeline had just accelerated dramatically, which meant the pediatric ward would face assault much sooner than Sarah had anticipated. As the hospital's lights flickered and went out, the attackers had found the main electrical systems. Sarah's tactical preparation entered its final phase. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows through the corridors, creating a nightmarish landscape that would soon become a battlefield where a former Delta Force operator turned pediatric nurse would make her final stand to protect 12 innocent children from professional killers who had already demonstrated their willingness to murder anyone who stood in their way. The first sign that Sarah's careful preparations were about to be tested came through the emergency lighting's red glow reflecting off the polished barrel of a rifle as 4 armed men emerged from the main stairwell onto the pediatric ward. They moved with the aggressive confidence of professionals who had encountered no meaningful resistance during their systematic clearing of the hospital's lower floors, completely unaware that they were entering territory defended by someone with training equal to their own. Sarah had positioned herself in the central nurse's station, using the elevated counter and computer equipment as both concealment and a command post from which she could observe the entire unit. The Chun brothers were with the younger children in the interior rooms, following her instructions to keep everyone quiet and calm no matter what sounds they might hear from the corridors. Through her carefully positioned mirror system, reflective medical equipment strategically angled to provide sight lines around corners, Sarah watched the assault team's approach. The lead man, a compact individual with military-style short hair, used hand signals to direct his companions toward different areas of the ward. Their tactical formation was textbook perfect, designed to clear rooms quickly while maintaining mutual support. What they couldn't know was that Sarah had spent the previous 30 minutes turning their textbook tactics against them. Every room they were preparing to clear had been subtly modified, with furniture arrangements and medical equipment positioned to create fatal funnels where defenders could engage attackers at maximum disadvantage. The team leader directed 2 men toward the patient rooms along the east corridor while he and his remaining companion advanced toward the nurse's station. Sarah remained motionless, controlling her breathing and heart rate through techniques learned during years of combat operations where discovery meant death. The first trap activated when the 2-man team entered room 312, where young Tommy Martinez had been recovering from surgery until Sarah moved him 20 minutes earlier. The room appeared normal, but Sarah had repositioned the heavy patient bed so that it would tip forward when the door was fully opened, creating a massive obstacle while triggering an avalanche of medical equipment she had carefully balanced on nearby tables. The crash was tremendous, followed immediately by shouts of confusion and anger as the 2 attackers found themselves trapped beneath a pile of monitoring equipment and furniture. One man's weapon discharged accidentally, the muzzle flash visible through the doorway as he struggled to free himself from the tangle of 4 poles and machinery. Sarah moved instantly, her Delta Force training taking complete control as she utilized the distraction to eliminate the immediate threat. Drawing a scalpel from her medical supplies, she approached the struggling attackers with the silent efficiency of a predator. Both men were disoriented and partially pinned, making them vulnerable to precisely applied force in ways their tactical training had never anticipated. The first attacker never saw her coming. Sarah's strike was surgical in its precision, targeting the carotid artery with the same anatomical knowledge she used daily to care for her patients. The second man had just begun to struggle free when Sarah's medical knowledge of human physiology ended his threat permanently and silently. Meanwhile, the team leader and his companion had reached the nurse's station and immediately recognized that something was wrong. Their teammates' radio silence, combined with the obvious sounds of struggle from room 312, told them that they were facing unexpected resistance. "Control, this is Team 3. The leader spoke into his radio. "We have contact on the pediatric floor. Request immediate backup and tactical assessment." The response crackled through his earpiece. "Copy Team 3. All other units are engaged. You're on your own until Judge Harrison is located and eliminated. Complete your sweep and report." Sarah had moved to a new position during the radio exchange, using her intimate knowledge of the ward's layout to approach the remaining attackers from an unexpected angle. The maintenance corridor she had discovered during her first week of employment provided access to areas behind the nurse's station that the attackers couldn't anticipate. The team leader was conducting a tactical assessment when Sarah emerged from the supply closet directly behind him, moving with the deadly silence that had made her one of Delta Force's most effective operators. Her approach was so quiet that his companion, scanning the corridor with his rifle, never noticed the danger until it was far too late. Sarah's attack was swift and decisive. Years of hand-to-hand combat training combined with detailed knowledge of human anatomy made her more dangerous in close quarters than armed opponents who relied primarily on weapons. The team leader's companion dropped silently, his rifle clattering against the floor as Sarah immediately turned her attention to the remaining threat. The team leader spun toward the sound, bringing his weapon up with practiced speed, but Sarah was already inside his defensive perimeter, using techniques designed specifically for defeating armed opponents in confined spaces. Her nursing training had taught her precisely where to apply pressure to disrupt the nervous system, while her military background had taught her how to do so with lethal efficiency. The engagement lasted less than 10 seconds. When it was over, Sarah stood alone in the pediatric ward, surrounded by the specialized equipment she used daily to preserve life. Having just utilized her unique combination of medical knowledge, and military training to protect her patients from armed killers. She quickly secured the attackers' weapons and radio equipment, recognizing military-grade hardware that suggested these weren't ordinary criminals, but professional soldiers or mercenaries. The radio traffic she monitored revealed that teams throughout the hospital were encountering unexpected difficulties, with several units reporting casualties and communication failures. More importantly, she learned that Judge Harrison still hadn't been located, meaning that the assault teams would continue their violent search until they found him or eliminated every potential witness who might have knowledge of his whereabouts. The pediatric ward's temporary safety would only last until additional reinforcements arrived or the other teams completed their assignments. Sarah realized she faced a crucial decision. She could continue defending the ward passively, using her tactical advantages to protect her patients until law enforcement eventually responded to the crisis. But passive defense meant accepting that other innocent people throughout the hospital would continue to die while the attackers searched for their primary target. Alternatively, she could take the offensive, using her newly acquired weapons and intelligence about the attackers' organization to hunt down the remaining assault teams before they could complete their mission. The aggressive approach offered the possibility of ending the crisis quickly, but it meant leaving her patients temporarily undefended. The decision was made for her when 8-year-old Emma began crying in the interior room where the children were hidden. Her appendix surgery had been complicated, and the stress of the evening was causing severe pain that required immediate medical attention. Sarah could provide the necessary care, but Emma's distress was creating noise that would attract any additional assault teams to the pediatric ward. Sarah quickly moved to the children's hiding place, administering pain medication to Emma while explaining to the Chun brothers that she needed to leave the ward temporarily to eliminate the remaining threats before they discovered the hidden patients. "You want to leave us here alone?" Marcus asked, his voice tight with fear. "I want to make sure no one else can find you here," Sarah replied, checking Emma's vital signs as the medication began taking effect. "The people who came to hurt everyone don't know about this room. But if I don't stop them now, they'll eventually search everywhere." She gave Marcus one of the captured radios, showing him how to monitor the emergency frequencies for updates about police response or additional threats. "If anyone tries to enter the ward who isn't wearing a police uniform or hospital identification, use this," she said, placing one of the captured pistols in his hands after quickly showing him the basic safety procedures. David looked at the weapon with wide eyes. "You really think we might have to?" "I think you're brave enough to protect the younger kids if you have to," Sarah replied. "But I'm going to make sure you don't have to." Before leaving the ward, Sarah conducted a final check of her preparations. The remaining defensive positions were still intact, the children were safely hidden with adequate medical supplies and emergency communication equipment, and the ward's access points were monitored through her improvised surveillance system. Most importantly, she now had detailed intelligence about the attackers' organization, equipment, and objectives. The radio traffic had revealed that they were operating under tight time constraints, with extraction vehicles scheduled to depart within 40 minutes regardless of mission completion status. Sarah had 40 minutes to hunt down and eliminate at least 15 professional killers spread throughout a 7-story hospital building, while protecting her pediatric patients and potentially saving Judge Harrison's life. The quiet night nurse was about to undertake the most challenging mission of either her military or medical career, knowing that failure would mean death for everyone she had sworn to protect. Moving through the darkened hospital corridors with weapons taken from dead attackers, Sarah began her transformation into a one-woman counter-assault force, drawing on every aspect of her dual training to wage a war where medical knowledge and military skills would prove equally essential for victory. Sarah moved through the hospital's darkened corridors like a ghost, her nursing shoes silent against polished floors as she hunted the remaining assault teams with methodical precision. The captured radio provided constant updates on enemy positions and intentions, revealing that the attackers were becoming increasingly desperate as their timeline compressed and casualties mounted from her earlier defensive actions. The first team she encountered was systematically clearing the maternity ward, where 3 new mothers and their babies were trapped in rooms they couldn't safely evacuate. Sarah watched from a concealed position as 4 armed men approached the nursery, their intentions clear from the casual way they handled weapons around innocent civilians. Drawing on her Delta Force training in close-quarters combat, Sarah used the hospital's infrastructure against the attackers. The maternity ward's central supply room contained compressed gases for emergency medical procedures, which she quickly repurposed into improvised weapons. A carefully placed breach in the oxygen supply line created a concentrated atmosphere that would disorient the attackers while remaining safe for the patients behind closed doors. Her attack began when the lead gunman entered the nursery. Sarah had positioned herself above the suspended ceiling tiles, using the hospital's maintenance crawlways to approach undetected. As the attacker moved beneath her position, she dropped through the ceiling directly onto his shoulders, driving him to the ground while simultaneously disarming him and using his body to shield herself from his companion's immediate response. The engagement was brutal and efficient. Sarah's combination of military combat training and intimate knowledge of human anatomy made her devastating in close quarters. She moved between the attackers with deadly precision, using their own weapons against them while protecting the vulnerable patients nearby. The entire encounter lasted less than 2 minutes, ending with 4 neutralized threats and 3 mothers frantically clutching their newborn babies in grateful terror. "Stay in your rooms and keep quiet," Sarah instructed the women, her voice calm despite the violence that had just occurred. "Help is coming, but there are more dangerous people in the building. Don't come out until you hear police sirens." The captured radio traffic revealed that her actions were having a significant impact on the remaining assault teams. The mission commander was becoming increasingly frustrated with the unexpected resistance, ordering his remaining units to abandon stealth in favor of speed and aggression. This tactical shift worked to Sarah's advantage, as the attackers' increased noise and movement made them easier to track and predict. Sarah's next objective was the pharmacy, where she had observed a 6-man team attempting to breach the reinforced security door that protected the hospital's controlled substances. These weren't typical drug seekers. Their systematic approach and professional equipment suggested they were either trying to acquire specific medications or eliminate evidence of their operation. The pharmacy's location in the hospital's basement level provided Sarah with numerous tactical advantages. The confined space limited the attackers' ability to maneuver, while the numerous chemical storage areas offered opportunities for creative problem-solving that her Delta Force instructors had never anticipated teaching. Using her medical knowledge, Sarah identified several combinations of common pharmaceuticals and cleaning supplies that could create incapacitating but non-lethal chemical reactions. Her goal was to neutralize the threats without creating hazards for patients or staff who might be trapped elsewhere in the basement. Her assault on the pharmacy team began with a carefully orchestrated distraction. Using the hospital's public address system, she created a series of false announcements designed to draw the attackers away from their defensive positions. Her voice, disguised through electronic distortion, claimed to be a federal agent coordinating the evacuation of Judge Harrison to a secure location on the 7th floor. The deception worked perfectly. 4 of the 6 attackers immediately abandoned their positions to pursue what they believed was their primary target, leaving only 2 men to guard the pharmacy entrance. Sarah approached these remaining threats through the building's utility tunnels, emerging behind their position with the element of surprise firmly in her favor. The engagement was swift and decisive. Both guards were neutralized before they could raise an alarm or summon reinforcements. Sarah then used their radio equipment to monitor the other 4 attackers as they rushed toward the 7th floor, buying herself additional time to pursue her larger objective. Through intercepted communications, Sarah learned that Judge Harrison had indeed been moved to the hospital's surgical suites in the basement level, where he was being protected by 2 federal marshals who had recognized the threat earlier in the evening. The attacker's commander had finally received intelligence about the judge's actual location and was directing all remaining assets to converge on the surgical area. Sarah realized that she was now the only obstacle between 12 professional killers and their target. The federal marshals were trained law enforcement officers, but they would be outnumbered 6 to 1 and caught in defensive positions with limited escape routes. Without immediate intervention, Judge Harrison would be killed along with his protectors. Moving through the basement corridors toward the surgical suites, Sarah encountered the most challenging tactical situation of the entire operation. The remaining assault teams had established overlapping fields of fire covering all approaches to their target, using professional military tactics that eliminated most conventional methods of approach. Sarah's solution drew on both her medical and military backgrounds. The hospital's central air handling system provided access to areas above the surgical suites, while her knowledge of the building's infrastructure revealed service corridors that the attackers couldn't anticipate. Most importantly, her medical training gave her access to surgical tools and techniques that could be used in ways their tactical planning had never considered. Her final assault began in the hospital's blood bank, where she acquired materials for what her Delta Force instructors would have recognized as psychological warfare. Using medical tubing and storage bags, she created realistic blood trails leading away from the surgical area, suggesting that Judge Harrison had been wounded and moved to a different location. The deception was enhanced by her use of the hospital's intercommunication system to create false radio chatter about medical emergencies in other areas of the building. Her voice, disguised and distorted, created the impression of multiple medical teams evacuating a critically injured patient through various emergency routes. The psychological pressure on the assault teams was immediate and effective. Their mission timeline was already compromised, their casualties were mounting, and now they faced the possibility that their target was being moved beyond their reach. Several teams broke from their defensive positions to pursue the false leads, reducing the concentration of force around the surgical suites. Sarah's direct assault on the remaining defenders utilized every aspect of her unique skill combination. She approached through the surgical suite's sterile supply area, using her medical access credentials to bypass electronic locks that would have stopped conventional attackers. Her appearance in full surgical gear, moving with the confident efficiency of medical personnel, allowed her to get close to the remaining threats before they recognized the danger. The final engagement occurred in the surgical suite where Judge Harrison lay unconscious, protected by two wounded federal marshals who had already exchanged gunfire with the assault teams. Sarah entered the operating theater to find three attackers positioning themselves for a final assault on the marshals' defensive position behind overturned medical equipment. Her intervention was swift and decisive. Years of surgical training had taught her to work with precision under extreme pressure, while her Delta Force background had taught her to eliminate threats efficiently and completely. The combination proved devastating to attackers who were focused on their intended targets and completely unprepared for assault from an unexpected direction. When the engagement ended, Sarah stood in the surgical suite surrounded by the tools of healing she had used to protect life by taking it. Judge Harrison remained unconscious but alive, while the federal marshals received immediate medical attention for their wounds using the same skills Sarah employed daily in pediatric care. The sound of police sirens finally filled the air as law enforcement units that had been coordinating their response throughout the crisis made their entry into the hospital. Sarah's radio interception had revealed that backup units were being held in reserve while the primary assault teams completed their mission, but the prolonged engagement and mounting casualties had finally convinced the attacker's commander to order a withdrawal. Sarah made her way back to the pediatric ward as dawn broke over the city, finding her young patients safe and protected in their hiding places. Marcus and David Chun had maintained their watch throughout the night, ready to defend the younger children if necessary, but never required to use the weapons Sarah had provided. As federal investigators and medical personnel flooded the hospital to assess the damage and treat survivors, Sarah returned to her duties as a pediatric nurse with the same quiet efficiency she had shown before the crisis began. The transition from soldier back to healer was as seamless as her earlier transformation had been, though the night had reminded her that sometimes the best way to preserve life was to be prepared to take it from those who threatened the innocent. The official reports would describe a coordinated assault by foreign mercenaries attempting to assassinate a federal judge, thwarted by exceptional cooperation between hospital security, law enforcement, and medical personnel. Sarah's role remained classified at her request, allowing her to continue her work caring for children without the complications that would have followed public recognition of her actions. In the months that followed, Sarah continued working the night shift in the pediatric intensive care unit, maintaining her reputation as the hospital's calmest and most competent nurse. Her colleagues never learned why she had seemed so uniquely prepared for the crisis, or why the children in her care had emerged from the terrifying night completely unharmed. Only Sarah knew that sometimes the quiet heroes are the ones whose greatest strength lies in never having to reveal the full extent of their capabilities, protecting others through vigilance, preparation, and the willingness to stand between the innocent and those who would do them harm.